in the Biden administration as senior advisor for industrial strategy, and so I worked on this policy, but doesn't mean I won't actually have some criticisms. So I wanted to focus on electric vehicles as kind of a case that we can maybe apply some of these frameworks to. So I want to talk, first of all, about what some of the policies were, talk about the status, talk about obstacles, and then conclude with some lessons. So what are the policies? There's a very key one that I left off that Anne caused me to think about, which is R&D. So a lot of R&D and standard setting, battery chemistries, standards for EV chargers that was set up by the Department of Energy. But the first one on the list is goal setting. 50% of U.S. vehicle sales in the U.S. should be electric vehicles or plug-in hybrids by 2030. And I've thought this was kind of a, nothing burger, but in fact, getting to this goal and getting agreement by the automakers, the union, there was a lot of consultation that happened, and sort of setting the goal was actually set at 40 to 50%. There was just a lot of work that went into that, and very, very important for aligning objectives. There's a bunch of supply side subsidies for batteries and components, plant conversion, EV chargers, demand side subsidies. There's also regulations, so fuel economy regulations, Made in America regulations, which I will defend, and at least in most cases, and then tariffs and a proposed ban on Chinese software in connected vehicles. So that's kind of the menu of all these policies and how do they work together and what have they been doing. So just to look at some outcomes so far. One is that auto employment is actually quite high, and I think it's important to think about this. I mean, this is, 1.1 million jobs or so in a labor market of whatever it is, 150 million. But I think it's important for a bunch of reasons. One is, regardless of if we don't do this transition right, we can lose the whole industry. That would be bad, partly because I think it tanks support for a future IRA or future climate policy. There's also a lot of associated jobs that are not on this chart. There's a lot of software. There's 100 million lines of code in a modern car, so that kind of thing. There's been a kind of a slowdown in the rate of acceleration of electric vehicle sales. That is not the same as a slowdown in electric vehicles. And what this chart shows is that, in fact, we're still ahead of projections made as recently as in 2023. So there's some bumps along the way. We could talk later. I'm actually optimistic about the next couple of years. We've seen a ton of ecosystem investment, so I think this is crowding in. So we identified some bottlenecks. We identified some areas of Chinese domination, so I think the IRA is actually really pro-competition in that sense of creating alternatives to Chinese battery components. You can see that there are a lot of investments in a lot of states, and particularly red states. Kentucky, Tennessee, et cetera. And yeah, 84% is in these 10 states, but they're quite politically diverse. And a lot of this really was spurred by the IRA, so that you can see the big hump that jumps, so it starts going up with a bipartisan infrastructure law and then really starts jumping with the IRA. So one thing about what's happening to costs, this shows that we're, in terms of the purchase price for EVs, if you include the subsidy, we're actually close to parity. If you include the operational costs of the car, we've long been in a situation where EVs are cheaper. This chart, I think, underestimates how close we are to parity because the automakers have persisted in this strategy of very large content-filled vehicles. And as they start to roll out in the next year or two smaller vehicles that will be cheaper, in part because they have smaller batteries and those are cheaper, we'll see actual parity. Charging infrastructure. This there's been some growth, but not nearly what we need. So we need a bunch of private charging. But then only 60% of American homes have driveways. And so DOE has estimated we need about 1.2 million public chargers. We've installed about 180,000 chargers, so not quite there yet. Another issue here, I think, is small suppliers. There's a bunch of jobs at risk in the transition. If we do this right, there's an opportunity to fix overcapacity in internal combustion engine parts, so like piston rings and things like that, a lot of small stamping, with needs for those capabilities in stamping and machining in a lot of other clean energy products that we hope to ramp up, so heat pumps, transformers, et cetera. But there's some obstacles to doing that. Though these are very small firms, they get one bet or they're out of business if they bet wrong. And so making introductions for them, so this comes back to a lot of the kind of convening that's done informally. It's not required in the IRA, but very important to making it work. So DOE is writing a playbook to help companies and our technical assistance institutions like the manufacturing extension partnerships to help companies find these new markets. There's some financing programs, both financing and grants. An issue here, kind of the spectra of Solyndra hovers over all this, and so it costs about the same to vet, a $50 million grant as it does a $5 or $10 million grant or loan, and so it's extremely costly to involve small suppliers in this. And so there's some workarounds that we can talk about, and then workforce. I feel like is a kind of missed opportunity here that so often. So we've moved away, which is good, from the old way of doing training, which was characterized as train and pray, no connection to employers, to saying employers should drive things. And employers should have a seat at the table, but employers don't have the same interests as society. They don't want labor mobility. They don't want general training, really. And so and they also often lack the capacity or the technical knowledge to know, what kind of smart manufacturing technique would be applicable to their business. How would they integrate it? How would they transform it in their organization? So I think this is an area where that really hasn't been talked about. Is sometimes you need not just a new product or some kind of, productivity gain where you're doing essentially the same thing, but you're moving down a learning curve. In some of these cases, we actually need a real transformation where we're changing the role of workers. They can become problem solvers, with the kind of democratized sensors, et cetera. That isn't happening as much as it might. So this is just a potential future policy, but one thing that I think could happen is sort of thinking about supply chains. So supply chains are problematic in the auto industry because the auto companies have, in the US ones particularly, have had a policy of kind of organizing their production, organizing their design, organizing the way they work with a strong goal about retaining monopsony power. And that's not so conducive to building a vibrant, high-wage, innovative sector. So what are some lessons? And here I think this first point about the role of place of technology-based analysis, I think this is an answer to Kathleen's question from yesterday about what to teach. I think there's a real need for teaching this kind of analysis from the point of view of the public sector, not from the point of view of consultants. And so thinking about good jobs, thinking about places, thinking about coalitions, all that stuff is really important. A second kind of lesson is the ability to crowd in investment. And so, I'm an economist, I'm in favor of a carbon tax, but I think in addition to that, the importance of these convenings and the importance of these specific subsidies in the IRA is a lot of effort and work that went into figuring out what are the bottlenecks, what are the things that are lacking, and putting subsidies on, putting extra effort. And so there's been a lot of just trips to Michigan by the White House to figure out how are we going to get small suppliers to take up these things. You can think you have screaming demand signals. You have to make people aware of that these programs exist. A second thing, just following on a point from Joel about the importance of active stakeholders. When I started in 2021 at the administration, I was very worried that we were going to be replacing $30 an hour engine jobs in the unionized North with non-union $16 an hour battery jobs, and that's not that attractive. And I don't feel that way now. And a lot of that is the efforts of the UAW, not just by itself. I think a less, state capacity is also important. And we've seen, I think the Department of Energy has learned, there's also been some, internal debates about how do you use this work to actually create good jobs. So I actually think that the job and climate goals are not necessarily in conflict, and in some ways they're complements. On the not conflict, we did not have a fast charger industry in the US. We had 0 producers. We now have more than 20 producers of DC fast charging. And we did the analysis that is not a reason for slowing down in adoption of EV chargers. I think if we had more agile suppliers and good jobs, we'd actually be more quick to adopt some of these new technologies and move faster, and there's always going to be a lot of change, or hopefully will be a lot of change in battery chemistries. If you have well-trained workers, well-paid workers that are experienced, that's going to be faster. And then I just repeat the point about, I think we haven't fully figured out how to organize this organizational transformation. So thank you.